first session of third day of AICTE adult-sponsored faculty development program on atmospheric remote sensing methods and advances. To extend this program and share his insights on LiDAR remote sensing of the atmosphere, we have with us Dr. A. Jayaram. Sir has been the former director of NARL. Sir has received his BSc in physics from Madurai University back in 1977 and then continued with his MSc in physics from Madras University in 1979 and then holding a PhD in atmospheric science from Physical Research Laboratory, Gujarat University in 1985. Since then, Sir has held various prestigious positions like Scientist D at PRL Ahmedabad, guest scientist at Munich University, Munich, Germany, visiting research physicist at Scripps Institute of Oceanography, University of California, professor at PRL Ahmedabad, program director at Space Science ISRO headquarters Bangalore, Director, NARL, Gandaki. Sir has also received prestigious honors and awards, naming only a few here. So he has been awarded in 1988 by INSA Young Scientist Award, then PRL Award on Earth Science, Earth and Planetary Sciences, Fellow of Indian Academy of Science, and he also shared in 2007 the Nobel Peace Prize Team Award to IPCC as one of the lead authors of the IPCC Climate Change in 2001. Elected Bureau Member Committee on Space Research, COSPER, and in 2010 he also held the ISRO Merit Award, and then in 2012 the ISRO Team Excellence Award. He was also awarded by Sardar Patel Award. He got the 8th International Sardar Patel Award by SVP Foundation, New Delhi. Sir has also been elected as Vice President of COSPER and in 2015 ISRO Performance Excellence Award. Sir holds membership of various professional and scientific bodies. Sir, all the participants are eagerly waiting to hear from you. I, on behalf of IST, express our warm welcome to you on this web program and invite you to deliver your talk on LiDAR and its effect on atmospheric sciences. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Jaydeep, for your nice words. So let me share my screen.
Hello.
So it's on the screen, Jaydeep. It's okay.
Yes, sir. It's
okay. So good morning to all of you. And at the outset, let me thank Professor Chandra and colleagues for inviting me to give this talk. So during the talk, participants, if you have any questions or doubts, you can put it in the chat box. At the end of the talk, I will address them. So the plan of the talk is as follows. So after a brief introduction, we will see what's a LiDAR. And then we will go to the LiDAR theory. So to appreciate the theory, we should have the basic idea about the radiative processes like Rayleigh scattering, Mie scattering, absorption, LiDAR equation, etc. After that, we will see some technical details of a LiDAR, like a LiDAR block diagram, then the individual components like laser, telescope, photomultiplier, and what is the photon counting method, and then what is the signal and associated noises. And at the end, we will see some examples of different types of LiDARs in the country and with their sample results. So since this webinar is on remote sensing of the atmosphere, I thought I will just start with a general slide. Of course, my colleagues might have discussed about this. So remote sensing means we are, let me put my pointer. So of course, column of the atmosphere. So of course, we can do in situ studies like, sending a rocket or sending a balloon inside the atmosphere, but it's of course expensive and tiresome too. So we are adopting to this remote sensing method. Of course, we can call it as a complementary method. Yes, in situ measurements are also equally important. So when we say remote sensing the atmosphere, we can do it from space as well as from ground. And then they are broadly classified into two categories: active remote sensing and passive remote sensing. When we say active remote sensing, we use our own source of light. Whereas passive is we use the passive light. For example, a good example is like taking a picture with a camera. If the camera has a flashlight, we call it as an active. If you just use the existing light and click the camera, then it is passive remote sensing. Okay. Then of course we are using the electromagnetic radiation. It could be optics or it could be radio based. And this is similarly, this is same applicable for remote sensing from the ground also, of course, active, and then either optical method or radio methods. So coming to LIDAR, it applies here. That is, we can do it using LIDAR from space as well as from ground. And it is, of course, an active remote sensing tool because we have our own light source, that is laser. Of course, we can do it from the ground and active remote sensing using optics. So, what is a LIDAR? So, LIDAR stands for light detection and ranging. That's the full form of LIDAR. It is similar to radar. Of course, first radar was invented. Then when this method came, so it is easy to say LIDAR. So here instead of radio wave, here we are using the light wave. So, but basically it is now we use laser. So it is light detection and ranging. In fact, this whole concept started early from this searchlight. You know, in earlier time, during World War time, this kind of powerful searchlights were used to track the enemy aircrafts. You know, when they fly below the vicinity of the radar, this low-flying aircraft, the way of detecting them is using this kind of searchlight. But after the World War, this is one of the good outcome is that this was used for atmospheric science. And see, for example, when you see here this white light, the fact that we are seeing this light is because it is scattering the light towards us. Okay, this is of course, so the intensity of the light is of course proportional to the source as well as to the scattering medium. Scattering medium, when we say, it is air molecules and any suspended particles in the air medium. So since around 1960, the laser was invented. So one of the first uses of laser was to have the LIDAR. The LIDAR came into existence in 1961. And in fact, in the very beginning, 61, the laser was used to, they tried that, can we track the satellites? You know, this is a logical extension. Earlier, yes, searchlight were used for aircraft. So once this powerful laser is there, it can penetrate long distances. Can we track the satellite? That's how the whole LiDAR project started. But of course, the scientists involved in atmospheric science thought, why don't we scan this beam with a receiver, an optical receiver, and then, so you can see that there is a, though we say it's a well collimated, there is a small divergence of the laser beam, and of course the receiver, and then these two will sustain a volume in the atmosphere, right? So when we are measuring the scattered radiation from this volume, and then we can try to do some inversion algorithm and try to understand what are all the constituents here, like air molecules and aerosols. Here we can see we can adjust these two, and then we can select the scattering volume, right? But this has a limitation. We cannot go very high because this volume will become, the shape will become larger and larger and lot of errors. So some earlier time, you thought that why can't we keep the receiver somewhere in a hilltop and then send the laser from ground and then start scanning this beam from the hilltop. So all kind of things were done. But then when the pulsed laser came into existence, then this is no longer being used, and now we go for the backscattering method. In backscatter, when we say it is a pulsed laser. Of course, I will explain later what is the difference between a continuous wave laser and a pulsed laser. So here the pulses are sent perpendicularly into the atmosphere, and then we have a telescope. What is shown here is a Cassegrain telescope. That also I will explain later in the technical section what are all the advantages. So here the need for pulsed is that you shoot one by one pulse, and as the pulse traveling into the atmosphere, you start measuring the backscattered intensity from various altitude. So we have to do a sensitive photomultiplier tube, as well as we have to range it. That is, once you send the pulse, you send a trigger and then start counting as the laser, counting the backscattered signal as the laser pulse is traveling upward. Of course, we will see more in detail. Of course, we can, the same concept, we can make it still compact. Here, what it is shown is that instead of having two separate transmitter and receiver, you put it in a compact shell. So laser is here reflected from this secondary mirror. And this configuration I have shown looking down because this is the standard concept used in air and spaceborne LiDAR. Of course, if you are doing a mobile LiDAR, that also I will explain later, and the same configuration can be used to looking up, right? So this is of course a Newtonian telescope, and the output is taken and then counted here. So that is sort of basic. Of course, we will see more detail about the LiDAR in the technical section. Before going to the technical side, let us have some basic concepts about the radiative transfer processes within the atmosphere, like Rayleigh scattering. Of course, the Y is missing. I'm sorry for that. Mean scattering, absorption, and then we will see the LiDAR equation. So, what is this two scattering we are talking about? So this is just a cartoon I made to explain the difference between these two scattering processes, right? So what I have shown here is an incident electromagnetic radiation of wavelength lambda, and there is an air molecule. And you see, as far as visible radiation is concerned, if this is about 500 nanometer, we take a visible wavelength. Compared to that wavelength, our air molecule size is much smaller, of the order of nanometers. So this is, of course, I have drawn a slightly bigger, so it should be much smaller, okay? And now so that's why it is written air molecule, the size is much smaller than the incident wavelength. Now, if you visualize, as this radiation passes, sweep through this molecule, it induces a dipole. Why it induces a dipole? We can think within the air molecule, of course, you know that there are protons and electrons. We can define two charge centers. For all positive protons, we can, the effective one charge center, and all electrons, there is an effective negative charge center. So there is a positive, negative, there is a dipole. Now this, here we are considering the electric vector of the electromagnetic radiation. As this electric vector sweeps through, so positive, negative, like that. So the dipoles start oscillating with the same frequency of the incident wavelength. And once the dipole oscillates, it radiates in all the 4-pi direction. That is basically the Rayleigh scattering. Of course, in the next slide, we will see a little more expansion of that, but this is the basic concept. And whereas when a Mean scattering is there, what about if the particle is very big? Like say, this is of the order of say, if 500 nanometer, here we are talking of some 1 micron or 2 micron, big particles if we take. Then if you see here also, like this, of course here, since the size is big, there are many molecules are there. So it is not only sufficient just to consider a dipole. Here there are many dipoles are there. For example, within the wave itself, there is positive, negative, positive. So in principle, when the size of the scatterer is much bigger than the incident electromagnetic radiation, we have multiple dipoles within that. So there is an interference between the radiation emitted by these dipoles. So there is an interference pattern, and what we get around the scattered radiation is a cumulative effect of all the dipoles induced within this particle. Okay, so let us just see a little more on the Rayleigh scattering part. Of course, the theory was given by Lord Rayleigh in 1890. Of course, basically he wanted to explain why the sky is blue. So then he gave this concept, like what I have been telling before, the electromagnetic radiation. Suppose if you take the electric vector as normally in this, when we solve this equation, we resolve into two components. So the electric, because it can be oriented in any direction. So for ease of mathematical approach, one is perpendicularly polarized, another is parallelly polarized. Or in terms, the radiation vector is resolved into two components. One is perpendicular to this screen, another is parallel to the screen, right? Ei omega t. So now if you go to any point at P from the dipole, then this U0 or the incident R, this is the dipole radiation, which is coming out at a distance R, okay? These are all the standard one, like omega is the frequency of the vector, the incident vector, and then C velocity of light, etc. R is the distance. Similarly, we can solve for the parallel component. And if you want the net intensity I0, then of course it's an amplitude, modulus of the amplitude, because we do separately here. So we add it. And then see here, when the parallel, the cos theta will come, I will explain next slide. So basically, this is the equation. The intensity at C, please note there is a theta here. That is, the scattered radiation is spread around the electromagnetic radiation, like I show in the next slide. So this is how the scattered radiation will be distributed around the scatterer. So this is the particle here at the center. So radiation is coming here. As I said, this is, so the parallel component, there is a perpendicular component. But if you see the net, this kind of a dumbbell shape, this is the net radiation. However, there are two components within that. One is the perpendicular component and another is a parallel component. This is another way of writing the C square. The frequency is converted into lambda. So here the famous relation comes. The scattered radiation is proportional to lambda to the power -4. So yeah, here of course numerator lambda to the power 4 or lambda directly lambda to the power -1. What does it say? The strong wavelength dependence enhances the short wavelengths, right? The smaller the wavelength, more the scattering. So that is why within our visible spectrum, the blue light is scattered more than the red. And that is why, of course, we see the sky as blue. But in the early morning and the evening, the sun looks red because all the blue radiation is removed and the remaining red is reaching us. That's why it will look red. But the radiation removed is distributed all over the sky. This is one interesting fact. As I said, these two are polarized. If an observer has a linear polarizer with him and stand on a very clear site, preferably over a hilltop, and then hold the polarizer, look at the sky, and make it that it makes it 90 degrees with respect to sun. Here it looks sun is yet to rise, but you can do it at any angle. If sun is here, then you measure 90 degrees this side of the sky, okay? And then when you rotate the polarizer, you will see at one particular 90 degree, one component will be completely missing and only one component will be there. But if you use a polarizer and the alignment is just opposite, in fact, no radiation will come through. The sky will look dark. So this is one way of showing students how the scattered radiation is really polarized. Only the requirement is that the sky should be clean. Okay. Otherwise, if aerosol scattering is there, it will slightly complicates the thing. That is our next slide. Yeah. Now, after 1890, this is something around 1908. Gustav May, Professor Gustav May is a German mathematician. He generalized it. He said that why you have to really put a condition that it should be small. It is small, okay, fine, as far as to explain the blue color of the sky. But the scattering theory should be general, right? So he said that there is a ratio of the wavelength to the size of the particle. So he defined the term alpha. Then he said it is actually the scattering is proportional to the size parameter. Okay. Then of course Legendre polynomial, he solved the dipole equations and got the interactions among them. And then so he introduced one more. So the concept again, IL intensity perpendicular, intensity parallel. This is the amplitude square gives the intensity. And now it is a function of size parameter. And since now the particles are big, the refractive index also comes into picture. The Rayleigh we used to ignore because Rayleigh for air molecules are concerned, it's mainly nitrogen and oxygen. There is not much of a difference either in the polarizability or refractive index. So, of course, in a detailed Rayleigh equation, they are there. But you can, even if you ignore, you will not make a big mistake. But here, absolutely, we cannot ignore the refractive index of the particle because, as you may be knowing, aerosols come all several chemical characteristics, sulfate, nitrate, and soot particles. So the refractive index changes largely. So this becomes the mean scattering equation. And same, the scattering diagram we have seen for Rayleigh. This is for the, here there is nothing as this is a mean scattering. Please note that Rayleigh scattering is a special case of mean scattering. That is, mean scattering is a general scattering theory, but when you put the condition that the scatterer is much smaller than the wavelength, then it becomes a special case of mean scattering theory, that is Rayleigh scattering theory, right? So now, see here, now this is for about 0.55 micron or 550 nanometer wavelength, visible wavelength. So now the particle, now this is almost, you see, in fact it is smaller, much smaller. So you see the shape, it is the outcome of the mean scattering. It is published in 95, the ammonium sulfate particle. So it looks almost like a Rayleigh scattering. Now slowly increase the size of the particle, the diameter of the particle, right? You see, the more and more radiation is scattered in the forward direction. Still, you increase more forward, and almost nothing in the back. It is most of the radiation are scattered in the forward direction. That is how it changes when you increase the size of the particle. Of course, this is for the ammonium sulfate particle, and then the relative humidity. And of course, we can do it for, once we know the refractive index of a particle, we can do it for all types. This is one of my very earlier computations. So this is again for 50 or 0.55 micron. And then this is the particle 1.53. You see here, this list shows the different types of aerosols and their refractive index, of course, taking from the standard models. And see, this refractive index, maybe you may be knowing, it is really a complex number. Okay, so the imaginary part is, of course, small. In some calculation, people used to ignore it, but definitely not possible in this scattering theory. But for example, see, for example, oceanic particle, sodium chloride particle, it's very, very small. Similarly, sulfuric acid droplet also 10 to the power minus 8, very small. Whereas soot, you see, you cannot ignore it. It is minus 1 means it is 0.44. Yeah, it's almost comparable to the real part of the refractive index. So this is how we can make computations, the same mean scattering computations for a single particle of size. You know, the size keep on increasing. So when it is very small, it will behave more or like a Rayleigh scattering. But as you start increasing the size, multiple interaction takes place between the dipole field, and you get the complex pattern. So again, a single scattering albedo is defined because this imaginary part is responsible for absorption of the radiation. Okay, so that is why this two term comes QE, QS. Q means efficiency, extinction efficiency, and scattering efficiency. In some cases, they are same because the absorption is very less. So we say one, that is all the radiations which is taken by the molecule or the particle is scattered back, no absorption. But here in this case, when there is a small absorption, 91% comes out, 93% comes out. This is known as single scattering albedo for the particles. Like that, of course, we can do for a variety of things. And just to keep remember this, I will be mentioning this. This is known as the LIDAR ratio. See, this concept is that there is a extinction versus backscattering. Like I was telling before, single scattering albedo, it is the other way around. That is, out of the backscattering, how much is the extinction? So this ratio is being used. I will explain you later. Similarly, you can calculate it for LIDAR ratio for the air molecules. Now, just a brief concept about the absorption, and then we will go to the LIDAR equation. See, what is absorption? Just assume there is a tube. Of course, many of you may be knowing, just for the sake of completeness, a tube, and then we will send a incident electromagnetic radiation. For example, let us assume now it is filled with ozone, and we send a UV lamp, and we know that it will be absorbed and I will come out, right? So what is the relationship between the incident radiation and the radiation which is coming out is given by the Lambert's law, or Beer-Lambert's law, or Bogart's law. So there were many people contributed to it parallelly. So I is equal to I0. This we can even write it as T, the transmission. So there is a transmission factor, multiplied by the transmission factor, you get I. Okay. Higher the transmission, more I, and smaller. That is why it is exponential minus tau. tau is the optical depth. So this defines the characteristics of the gas filled inside, and this is specific to that given wavelength. Okay, and this optical thickness in turn can be, of course, this is a unitless parameter. This can be expanded as beta into L. This is the attenuation coefficient. This is the length of the tube. Okay, and of course, by knowing the number density, we can say beta is number density into sigma. This is the cross section. And the same thing is used for scattering also. This is a centimeter minus 2 or L minus 2 scattering cross section. It is an area. This is per cc. So you end up with per L. That is the coefficient is unit length, right? Now, with that basic concept, we are coming to the LIDAR equation. So, as I have shown in the backscattering, so we have a transmitter, we send a laser beam, and then we have a receiver. So we can tune it, time it. Okay, after some delay, I will measure the radiation. So during that time t, and this is the z because the light has to go and come back. See, velocity of light t divided by 2. So at this t, let us see what is happening. So when this radiation hits, as I was telling, the scattering takes place. It is both Rayleigh scattering and Mie scattering. If it is very pure, very high altitude, and only Rayleigh scattering, in the lower altitude, both scattering will take place. See, a small portion of the radiation, that depends on the size of the telescope, you know. So you can draw an angle like this. So whatever coming in this angle, we are receiving. So first P0 becomes, you multiply by the transmission factor, P into T, and of course 0 to Z. This is the transmission is as a function of length, as you have seen earlier. And then this is the scattering function. And we call it backscattering function because we know the angle is now perfectly 190 degree. It is backscattered, okay? And this phase function is Rayleigh phase function as well as the Mie phase function. So we can write P is that what I have received in the receiver is proportional or equivalent to P0 T square, because the T is transmission. Once it is scattered, again it has to go through the same medium, you know. So T into T is T square, and this is the source term. The scattering is the source term, that is beta Z. And then, of course, A by Z square is, as I was telling, and this is the 1 by R square, the inverse law relation. That is basically, it is the solid angle sustained by the telescope at the scattering medium, which is proportional to the area of the primary mirror divided by the range square or the Z square in this case. Please note that here there are two unknown, one equation and two unknown. That is the transmission term. Here itself we know that we should know the extinction, whereas this is the scattering. So both are related, but at the same time, as far as this equation, now we do not know what is the T, what is the B. If we know one only, we can solve the other. But there is a way out that is known as the LIDAR ratio, which I was telling in the previous slide. So you try to establish a relationship between the backscattering to the extinction. We will some more thing we will see as we progress. So of course, this is now expanded in a more detailed way. So P of R, so that is the incident, the radio intensity of the emitted radiation. Then this is the system constant. Though since we are writing really the equal sign, so there are so many losses when any optical system. For example, in the first, when the laser hits the reflector and goes up, there is what, though we can select the best reflector, still 0.999 kind of thing. So there is one less than 1%. There is a loss here. Similarly, when it comes back in the telescope, there can be some loss. And again, interference filter has a large attenuation. Then the photomultiplier, what you use has its own efficiency factor. So all put together, that defines the system constant, can be evaluated once and for all for a given LIDAR system. This is the A by R square is the solid angle, you know, the area of the telescope and the range. That is why the backscattering coefficient is also given as per length per steradian. That is why they get afterwards it get cancelled out. And then this is the backscattering coefficient. This is the two-way attenuation term, but now we have expanded it. Instead of just writing T square, we write exponential T square, that is 2, and then integral of that attenuation coefficient up to that range. Okay. So this is the backscattering coefficient, the extinction coefficient is, yeah. So the beta R is a sum of attenuation loss due to Rayleigh scattering, attenuation loss due to aerosol scattering, and if there is any absorption. And that is why if you are taking that 532 nanometer and the absorption is very negligible. So that is why when the LIDAR, you have to define what for we are using the LIDAR. If it is purely for temperature, aerosol studies, and you select the wavelength such that absorption is negligible. But there are some, if you want to study some particularly molecular gases, like for example ozone, there is differential absorption LIDAR technique, and then we have to see to that the absorption is also there. So we select a wavelength according to that. Okay. So now to just to summarize the theory part, so there are so many radiative processes, as I said, Rayleigh scattering, there can be absorption, there can be Mie scattering, there can be resonance scattering. What is in the y-axis is the absorption cross section, that is the probability of scattering, and as you can see, it ranges from very low value for Rayleigh scattering, almost -30 to some 20 orders of Mie scattering is very strong, okay, of all the scattering process. But of course, the number of aerosols are less, that is another aspect. But per se, if you take a one Mie particle or one Rayleigh particle, the scattering is much high in case of the Mie scattering. So, and also these are all known as elastic scattering processes because there is no change in the wavelength. Whatever we send the wavelength, the same wavelength scattering is taking place. So we call it elastic scattering. Of course, there is another process known as inelastic process also. There will be Raman scattering and fluorescence scattering. They are also used in LiDAR technology for certain specific thing, like specifically, of course, I will be showing some example later. Okay, nitrogen, temperature, water vapor. But majority of the elastic scattering used for studying cirrus cloud, here y-axis it is altitude. They are all at a different altitude. So appropriately you select the theory to measure whatever the parameter you want to measure. Whether it can be a very high altitude, sodium, potassium, lithium, and that's basically resonance scattering is used. For temperature, Rayleigh scattering is used, temperature and density, temperature. Ozone, of course, absorption, that as I said, dial. Aerosol Mie scattering. This is polar stratospheric clouds, cirrus clouds. A whole lot of things we can do with the LiDAR. Now, with that brief idea about the theory part, now let us see what exactly a LiDAR consists of. So let us start with a black diagram, and then I will briefly tell about the laser, telescope, photomultiplier, and how the signal and noise will look like. So this is just an example of the PRL LiDAR, Physical Research Laboratory LiDAR, presently operational at Mount Abu. But for that matter, any standard LiDAR will have this kind of block diagram. So you start with a laser. In this case, it's a Nd:Arc laser. Primary wavelength output is 1064 infrared wavelength. So there is a second harmonic generator. As I said, this is an ideal wavelength for studying scattering process because there is there is less absorption by any gases in the atmosphere. So this second harmonic generator, it will double the frequency, or in other words, the wavelength will be halved. So from 1064, you can derive 532 nanometer, the green light. Then normally a beam expander is used because otherwise the pencil beam will be of the order of at the best maybe 1 centimeter diameter. So it is always advantageous to expand it to almost 10 centimeter. So in fact, the divergence will also reduced by the same factor, and also for eye safety and all. So the intensity per square area will be less when you expand the beam. Same speed, expand it to a much bigger diameter. So now the laser beam goes, and depending on what you want to study, you can select your telescope and the interference filter, etc. Here, for example, two telescopes are shown, one with the primary 40 centimeter mirror, another with the 90 centimeter mirror. I will explain it later why the advantages of these two telescopes. And these are all two different wavelengths are written. That also will become very clear. So as far as here, this is the basic concept, a laser, reflector, and the telescope. And then the receiver side, you see, you use, of course, the photomultiplier tube, and like preamplifier, discriminator, counter, and then finally the data is stored, and then this is you need not do online. You can do offline. Once the counts are stored in your computer, you can do it with depending on the kind of what you are going to measure. You can use the suitable immersion algorithm and derive whether it's aerosol, water vapor, temperature, etc. Now, very briefly, we will go through the laser, telescope, the individual components. Okay. So let us start with the laser. Here the example is the Nd:YAG laser. Of course, I hope you all know what is laser: light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Nd:YAG stands for neodymium, yttrium, aluminium, garnet. Here this neodymium is the doping material in the crystal yttrium, aluminium, garnet crystal to produce a lasing wavelength at 1064 nanometer. Okay. Then, as I said, using the frequency doubling or tripling, we can select, we can double it or triple it from the primary wavelength. But what here I want to tell an important thing, it's about the difference between a continuous wave laser and the pulsed laser. What exactly we mean by pulsed laser or pulsed? It is done by using Q switching. It's a technical term. Basically, it is an optical switch. So what do you do? The laser beam, when it goes here and forth, you allow the light to get amplified and then release it in a short duration of time. For example, see this graph here, just a cartoon I have made. So this, let us assume power. And I have written an example. Suppose we say it is a 20-watt laser. That means it gives 20 watt second continuous laser power. Okay, 20 watt is not a great power because it is you can think of your LED lamp at your home, the 20 watt LED lamp kind of thing. It's okay, fine, you can comfortable with that. But the same laser can be made very dangerous by using this Q switching. So what we do, suppose we say I need 10 pulses at 10 hertz rate. That is, I want to have 10 pulses per second, and let me say my pulse duration should be 10 nanoseconds. And it is, I am not giving any artificial number here, they are all the actual numbers. Okay. So what happens here, the 20 watt power is cut into 10 portion. Okay. So it means it is 2 watt. Now in this 2 watt, in this 0.1 second, you squeeze it to 10 nanoseconds. So you release a very high amount of power. In fact, if you multiply, you will get 200 megawatt. That is, this pulse contains 200 megawatt, mainly because the duration is too short, 10 nanoseconds. So now I have got 10 strong pulses per second of power 20 megawatt each pulse. And let me tell you, this energy is sufficient enough. Even if you 1 second, if you show it on an aluminum plate, it can put a hole through it. So it's basically like bullets. So you save the energy and send it in a very short time. So that is the pulsed laser. With that only, we can penetrate the atmosphere into very long heights. And then once it is sent into the atmosphere, so telescope, as I was telling earlier, there is a Cassegrain telescope and there is a Newtonian telescope. Cassegrain, this is the primary mirror with a hole. This is the secondary mirror. So it collects the radiation and then reflected, and then it comes back here. Idea is, of course, this is the focal length. Now, in order to take the beam outside, so we can even use a hyperboloid mirror. If it is originally it is a long focal length, we can even simply use a primary, just a reflective mirror also. But normally, because this length is large, so it is convenient to take the beam outside so that we have area to work with. Here only our detector and the photo multiplier, everything is coming. Okay, this is one of the convenient configuration normally used. Of course, we can use the Newtonian is also equally used. And here, instead of taking this beam out below, you take it in the side way. So primarily the light comes reflected, and then the flat mirror. Here only we have to, even we need not go for a hyperbola, just a flat mirror, because here only it has to travel a short distance here, right? But here now the only condition is that we have to have our detector fixed here, PMT, maybe a side on PMT and all, we can fix it here. Only small disadvantage is that you are adding weight to your telescope. If the detector is bulky, so you are and then somewhat inconvenient. So some people, of course, we have also used, you can use a fiber. Now that fiber cables are there, then you take a fiber and then we can send it to your detector layer. But this is depending on our convenience, you can use any of this configuration. Now let us see briefly what is a photomultiplier. The different types of photomultipliers are available in the market. This is the photocathode, right? There can be big, this narrow tubes. This is a side-on photomultiplier where a photocathode is here. There are square types, still compact are available. So what it is, as we can see, for example, if you take this photomultiplier, so there is a glass envelope, there is a photocathode. So this diagram I took it from internet. Please, there is no hole there. Okay, this is just the artist impression. The light is hitting, the photon is hitting. Otherwise, it's a beautiful plain cathode, and this is an entrance window. And then this is a cathode, and this is the anode. So positive and negative charge. So connected by a high voltage supply, it can be up to 2 kV, 2000 volt. But they are divided by this resistance and fed to different reflectors. They are known as diodes. They are also basically a photocathode kind of principle. So what really happens is that once a light photon strikes there, at the back side, the photoelectrons are emitted. The photocathode, and because there is a strong positive charge traveling, of course there is a focusing thing in net is there, so it will be all focused towards the first diode, and then this diode in turn electrons it will multiply. So these electrons are further multiplied. So every time 10, 10, 10 you are getting, you can see that by 10 you can get up to 100 to 1000 times amplifications you can get. So ultimately the output comes. So this is the principle. Normally the photocathode is either gallium arsenide. There, see, this is the sensitivity. It's called quantum efficiency. Up to 50% we can achieve. This is the wavelength, visible wavelength. Normally for 532 and all gallium arsenide works. This works very good. But of course, this is gallium arsenide. This is gallium arsenide phosphide. This is the efficiency slightly more. But of course, they are insensitive to the infrared side. Of course, if you want to measure the 1064, then you have to use APD, avalanche photodiode, etc. And then there is also one gate pulse. That is known as gated PMT. The operation of the electron multiplication process on diode is delayed using gating pulse. This is, see, what I am trying to say is that here you have a grid and then apply a negative charge. Do not allow the electron to come. This is because when you are using it in LiDAR, immediately the first scattering taking place, which can be very close to your the laser which is going out, it will be very strong, not only in density, but also because it is very close. So the solid angle will be very more. So it can damage the photomultiplier. So normally a gate is used and then tell the photomultiplier to stop it. Though the supply is on, but you put a negative and do not collect the photoelectron, okay? Then you allow the laser beam to travel a little distance and then open it. So the trigger pulse you select in such a way that you connect it to this and then you can have a delay. Of course, any doubt you can ask me later, I can explain it more detailed. So this is the way it will look like. So now I said there is an incident photon, multiplication takes place, and ultimately one pulse comes out. It can be of any shape depending on the incident photon. That is the intensity, basically. The signal. So different pulses come out. And then this pulse, this is, we call it output signal.
मम्मी के गुड़ तो आएंगे ना, मम्मी के गुड़ तो आएंगे ना.
Please mute your, hello, excuse me, mute your phone.
वो दूसरा वाला वर्जन होता है ना, जिनसे थोड़ी डिजी टाइप की होती है, उसमें अलग.
Madam, please mute yourself.
So once these pulses of different height comes, now this is a discriminator and a pulse generator. See what you can fix a discriminator level. See any pulse below which I will not take it. Why such pulses come is because since when a photomultiplier is charged with such a high voltage, sometimes the strange electron may come. This is because of the thermionic emission, that temperature itself sometimes, because the voltage is there, 1 or 2 electrons may fall even without the photon. This is, we call it a darker out. So if you close the incident light and see, there can be some stray photons, not photon, this is just a signal coming out. This is because of multiplication process, but electrons not produce, not photoelectron, but just a thermal electron. So we can characterize them and fix our discriminator level and then say that only pulse above which I will convert it into a square pulse. So that is what the job of this. So now you see beautiful pulses are made. So one pulse means, suppose if I say it is 50 nanosecond pulse, so 50, 50, 50, almost 150 nanosecond is the total for one pulse it generates, right? Then second, each one is like this, so that it is easy to for the counter to count it. Fine. But now if you see, there is a problem. The problem is that whenever each pulse comes, it becomes a shape, right? Like a square pulse. Suppose what happens if there is another pulse come very close, then this cannot take it, because it needs 150 nanosecond. We can say that this generator is dead. It is busy in making this pulse, so it will ignore it. So that is known as counting error. That will become true when the intensity is very high. When photons are coming at a very random, very fast manner, then we cannot use the photomultiplier in the counting mode. We have to go to the current mode. That's what. In such cases, PMT should be operated in the current mode. Otherwise, the counting error will come. That is why they are actually separated. Now, as I was saying, either you can use a gate pulse or you can give some distance. Let me see. I will explain further. So here you can, the concept is the signal is converted into square pulses and counted, and the stray pulses are ignored by this. Of course, you can eliminate it by keeping the photomultiplier in a cold chamber, like Peltier cooling and all are available. So even up to about minus 10 degrees centigrade, if you can keep it, you can greatly reduce this thermionic. That is why this overlap function has come. You might, in the earlier in the block diagram I was showing the transmitter and telescope, there is a distance between the two. So this we can play with this distance. See, though we say collimated beam, this is the transmitter laser beam, there is a small divergence, like 0.1 milliradians kind of divergence is there, or slightly of that order, okay? Whereas this can be about 1 milliradian, almost 10 times the field of view is larger. So the telescope is looking, laser is going through this. So after certain height only, the telescope is really seeing the full beam. Here there is a gradual increase, and then only we are seeing the full beam. That is what this overlap correction. Of course, we don't have to give any correction once the total overlap has taken place. Here, somewhere here in this, this is an actual measured value, something around 1.5 kilometer. After that, there is no correction. If you want to still use it, because you see, you are seeing lesser and lesser wavelength, this correction, this is, unless extremely necessary, I will advise not to use this kind of correction factor. But for some, we are desperate, to some extent, we can use for this region. Okay. Otherwise, but if you, as I was telling, the incident beam is when it is too indent, you can keep it a little far away. That is why in the earlier diagram, if you remember, if you are interested in studying radiation coming from very high altitudes, like mesospheric altitude, and you keep this distance large, so that overlap takes place at a higher altitude, so that the high indents backscattered signal from the low altitudes are not counted, not measured by the PMT. So your PMT is safe. This is this is a typical signal will look like, and the noise associated with this. So as I said, as the laser is going up, your telescope is on, you are counting it as a function of time. That is what is shown here as a bin number. Bin means bucket. You can think there are, so in this graph, there are 1,000 buckets. Each bucket diameter is basically the time. Okay, so in this time, whatever photon coming, it will collect and put it in this first bin, second bin, third bin, and so on. So in principle, this is converted into the altitude. Higher the altitude, the last bin will get the one which has traveled a long distance. The one which is coming from short, it will come immediately. Okay, you can call it bin number, or otherwise it is basically time, or time can be converted into altitude. So this is, so after some time you see the signal noise. This is an actual data. Just I want to impress upon the same day, but at two different times. You see, this was some earlier data. You see here, this is the 1650. It's around evening, 5 p.m. Indian time. This is around 9 p.m. See, after some time, here saturated. This is because this is the background sky radiation. Once you open the photomultiplier telescope into the sky, there is a constant because the sky is bright. So whether the laser is going or not, immediately you will see all these bins are filled with this much of photons. This is coming from the background. And of course, over and above, if your laser is strong enough, you can collect some signal, right? But as the night progresses, the sky radiation will fall. Slowly, your background count will reduce, and then you can start getting from at high altitudes also. So that is why normally it is that the lidars are operated, particularly Rayleigh lidar for temperature measurements and all are operated during night time, and preferably during a new moon time. So the sky is perfectly dark and the background count is very less. And still ideal is you go to a mountain top like Mount Abu, and then we can reach still higher altitude. Now we will see some examples of different lidar types with sample results, because so far what we have seen is the concept, the basic theory and how one can visualize a lidar. Now this is actual examples of working lidar in India and with some sample results. Of course, I have only showing those lidars in which I of having a lidar at PRL. We started. This is a 40 centimeter telescope. This is the country's first Nd:YAG backscatter lidar. Okay, but the story is 91 we started. By 92 April we are ready to make the first shot, and there was a big surprise waiting for us. The big surprise was that this is the sixth. There are different profiles are there. Backscattering coefficient measured by the lidar as a function of altitude. 40 centimeters. It's mainly for aerosol studies. You see, when we design the telescope, we have to make the theoretical estimate, right? What is the signal will come, etc. So this is actually our theoretical estimate. This is the scattering which we can expect for our lidar setup. This is what we expected. But when we switch it on, it worked up to this fine. But you see, afterwards, there is a large deviation. It started going like this. So we were really worried. Second day, third day, fourth day, whenever we repeated, we thought that probably our lidar is working fine up to 16, 17 kilometers. There is something terrifically wrong. Something happening, and we were really and then after about a week or so, I got a telex. 91.
Jayanti ma'am, can you please mute? Hello, Jayanti ma'am, can you please?
So I was talking about this surprising signal, which we could not understand why this is happening. Then one of our senior colleague, Professor Raghav Rao, was on sabbatical at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. And in about a week or so, one day I got a telex, saying that Jayaraman, it seems there is a big eruption. NASA people are all talking about, because at that time we were doing balloon experiments from Hyderabad for aerosol study. So since you are doing balloon experiment, why don't you conduct an experiment and see whether this volcanic eruption has any effect on your signal from Hyderabad? You can make measurement. Then we got, there is something immediately with the telex. I ran to Acharyaji's room and I said, hey, whatever we are getting may not be wrong. We are actually getting some very, very interesting signal. So every day we started firing, and then we are really seeing. And then, of course, we took some old newspaper and what exactly it is, and I could contact some NASA scientists. Then we found that, yes, in June 1991, when we were busy in building up the LiDAR, of course, our first measurement is 92, but 91, there was a very massive volcanic eruption, Mount Pinatubo. And it has put something around 30 megatons of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. It's an explosive volcano. Explosive because it's important, because it can directly inject the sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. And once the sulfur dioxide goes there, it reacts with water vapor to form sulfuric acid droplet and ultimately sulfate particles and all. So then we know that we are actually making the measurement of stratospheric aerosol injected by the volcanic eruption. Because once an eruption takes place, it takes about roughly 6 months time for this to go into the whole hemisphere. Because this is in the northern hemisphere, almost full of northern hemisphere was covered in the stratosphere with this sulfuric acid droplets, and about a year it covered the whole globe. So this is the most powerful eruption. In fact, after this Pinatubo eruption, we have such a massive eruption. We have still, till date, we have not got. It is almost 30 years now, and still it continues to be the strongest eruption. Okay, so now we were glad. So if you go to the previous slide, yeah, so what we are measuring is really the results. Then we send this profile to NASA people to verify. They immediately verified, and because they were using a satellite known as SAGE, Stratospheric Aerosol Gas Experiment. So, and then it's all history. Really, and then we continuously did our measurement all the way. So only in around after, yeah, this is 99, I had the best case in about 5 years time. Then what we started getting was what we expected in the beginning. This signal could have come because of eruption. This was the signal what we are receiving. Then, of course, since we have a lot of data, we have made some models and for different settling velocity for the aerosols. And then, of course, we compared with some other data available. The red squares are our data. And we have shown, and this is an important result. Actually, what this is, we have done it for the Mount Pinatubo 30 megaton. In fact, then we have increased it up to 100 megaton. And what we have shown that irrespective of the ejection, the amount of ejection, whether it is 30 megaton or 100 megaton, once they are put into the stratosphere, so more density means more motion, more collision, more coagulation, and they grow, and then ultimately they settle down. So that is a self-limiting factor. So typically we said that in about 3 years time, they are one eruption, okay? Multiple eruption, that is a different story. One eruption, stratospheric aerosol will form in about 6 months time, and then in about 3 years time, they will be all scavenged. Basically due to settling. There is no rain in the stratospheric altitude, it has only gravitationally settled. Then, of course, we are curious. This is only we are limited to. So I will be flashing some results from other LiDAR thing. Why only PRLM? Why don't we go around? So we made a small LiDAR. This is a commercially purchased micropulse LiDAR, very compact one, but purchased a Tempo Traveler, fixed it, converted into an air conditioner in the lab. And there is a window at the top, and started traveling. Just we were curious to see the profile. Basically, this is mainly aerosols. Now, once the Pinatubo glamour was over, then we were jobless, So we have to divert our concentration. So we were concentrating on the lower altitude aerosol layers. See, basically they extend up to about 3 kilometers. 2 to 3 kilometers. This is the mixed layer depth. Afterwards, relay scattering will take over. So the blue, if you want to see blue sky in this region, you have to take an aircraft and go above 3 kilometers. Then if you look through the window, you will see a perfect blue sky. But otherwise, it's all hazy below. Here, these are all dusty region, but it is true wherever you, I think the next slide is our famous Delhi fog. We took it the same vehicle to Delhi and see how high it is going. Compared to that aerosol layer, which went up to almost 3 kilometers, this fog is almost up to 300 meters. You know, this such data were earlier missing. We really wanted to see what exactly happening, how the fog develops, how it dissipates. So night almost 12:30 to by the time 10:30, and you know, in someday, you know, it will get cleared in the bottom, but the fog will remain there up to 200 meters. And so for a pilot to land, he may still have report a poor visibility, whereas in the airport they may say a better visibility because the fog still hangs at a higher altitude. Like that, so many data we got. Very interesting studies with that lidar. Then we thought, well, how about fixing it in an aircraft? So this is the NRSC aircraft, and there is a glass window at the bottom. Same lidar, put it looking down and started flying. Our idea is that in mega cities, you know, when you go from the city and go to the suburb, slowly you will start seeing a clean air, right? So we wanted to see under different season how much it spreads. In fact, it has implications to the atomic energy project also in case of a nuclear disaster and all. So how it spreads, and also in mega cities, the pollution disperses with respect to height and the distance. So this is an useful study. So almost 150 kilometers we covered. This is the on the Secunderabad, Hyderabad, that map. So we were making sorties. So when we are flying at 6 kilometers, then slightly increase the height. So these are all perfect blue sky, you know, the scattering is, but one majority of the aerosols are at a low altitude, confined to 2-kilometer altitude. And then, of course, then why don't we make it into a commercial line? Because the microbuilds is a purchased one. This is Dr. Bhavani Kumar from National Atmospheric Research Laboratory. So we discussed that why don't we make a one and then make a compact one so that it's available within India, made by within India. So we even filed the patent and all, and it's made by a company in Pondicherry. It's a compact lidar, something similar to the one what we have seen earlier. So again, the idea is this lidar we can continuously operate it. This is an example of one day data by Dr. Bhavani Kumar. You see here, this is the mixed aerosols, and then how the mixed layer is going high and then coming down. You know, see, this is just the atmospheric science point of view. The aerosols are confined in the lower altitude because it's cool surface. But as the sun comes up, it warms, and then the mixing height increases. Of course, the moisture can be made into cloud also. So various process studies, such data are very useful. Of course, we can nighttime we can hit it with the cirrus cloud, which is very typical of our tropical altitude. They play also a major role in climate change studies. It can trap the infrared radiation. So where do they occur? What is this thickness? And then, of course, this is a dual polarization lidar, same lidar, but in an advanced version. Of course, this also went for pattern with Bhavani Kumar. So there is a polarizer. You study the polarized scattered light. So depolarization will give whether it is the non-sphericity. So at the top altitude, they are basically ice crystal. As they come down, they are converted into droplets. They become more and more spherical. So this will give the type of the shape of the scatterers. And of course, you can do it with multiple wavelengths here. And then, of course, so it's a same scattering medium, but to see how the process, how it will talk about the size of the particles and then how transformations are taking place during that process, like aerosol dynamics. This is of course a Raman lidar where you use the Stokes line, Raman-Stokes line. So here you can specifically you can pick up the molecules. For example, in this case, it is a nitrogen Stokes line scattering by Raman scattering by nitrogen molecule, and this comes at 387, whereas the water vapor molecule comes at 408. Our exciting wavelength is 355. This is the third harmonic NDR. So we need one to get the elastic signal, and of course the harmonic we can convert. The nitrogen is used convert the density into a mixing ratio. Okay, so whatever profile, normal balloon experiment, typical IMD balloon experiment can go up to some 6-7 kilometers. With this, we can extend it. Of course, with more powerful primary mirror and laser, we can even reach very high altitudes. Then this is the Raleigh LiDAR, Dr. Raghunath's project. Okay, very quickly tell, I have a few more minutes left to quickly tell this is the method. I will not go into the inversion algorithm. Basically, the concept is that you start with an assumed value and start iterating. You assume the value for the pressure, and then you assuming the hydrostatic equilibrium. This is a onion peeling method. You try to estimate what should be the signal at one step below, like you take a delta Z and start coming down, and slowly it will convert and you can get the profile. So because of the quality of our first assumption, the error can be large. So what we did, we simultaneously we have an air glow imager. This is by Dr. Alok Theory. This can measure temperature at mesospheric altitude at that time. Okay, so this is ON emission. I am not going into the detail, but basically with this air glow photometer, we can estimate the temperature at 100 kilometers. Now, instead of depending on model profile, you put this as your seed value and then start integrating downwards. Now you see, compared to the earlier profile, this black, now using this O2 temperature, we can really go almost hit the 100 kilometers. This is a good kind of gain, and of course this was published in reputed journals. And of course we can study the contours of temperature fluctuations at mesospheric altitude. And this is another example of a Doppler LiDAR. This is now operational at NARL. You saw, of course, Professor P.D. Rao or Petra Suman or T.N. Rao might have told you about this requirement of wind for the heavy satellite launch vehicle, this known as wind biasing. So MST radar is continuously used for getting the wind profile before the launch. But you see, the radar has a limitation. It can go up to about 20 kilometers. Of course, the wind shears and all are important here. But the question is, can we extend this measurement to higher altitude? So then the LiDAR came into picture. So how about extending it to higher altitude? So same, this is known as the Doppler beam swimming method. Orthogonally, you measure, and here you, instead of measuring the intensity, you actually measure the wavelength shift, because when the Doppler shift along the line of sight, whether the scattering medium is moving towards you or for you, then you have the orthogonal function and you can derive the wind. These are all some of the examples. In fact, you see here, this is GPS, this is radius on day measurement. This is with the actual LiDAR, we can almost go up to 50 kilometers. In some cases, of course, 35. It depends on the quality of the atmosphere at the lower air below. As I was telling, it is a perfect moonless night, or how dirty the lower atmosphere was. Depending on that, we can. But in an ideal case, you can go up to almost 50 kilometers. Again, we can study temperature structure by spinning at a different range. We can calculate the structure. These are all of very importance to academic interest to atmospheric scientists. So let me conclude by saying just a few words about the spaceborne LiDAR. This is, of course, we do not have one in India, though ISRO has a plan. But for the sake of completeness, I thought you should know the existence of spaceborne LiDAR. The famous one is known as Calypso, Cloud Aerosol LiDAR Infrared Pathfinder Satellite Observation Card. It's a joint mission between NASA and KNES, launched in April 2006. Almost 10 years, fantastic data it gave. Many in our Indian scientists have also benefited from this satellite data, including one of my students, Dr. Amit Pandit. So after 2016, this 10 years, then the laser power got deteriorated. In fact, 10 years itself unattended, a laser working in the satellite, that's remarkable, I would say. And these are all some of the details. Those who are interested can refer it later. This is simultaneous measurement. This I got from Dev Inca. This is the light is a lidar in space technology experiment. They were having simultaneous measurement. This is from the space. Light was at that time space shuttle was operational, so a similar lidar was. In fact, they started with the light first, then the satellite came. These are all the different. Again, they also do the parallel and perpendicular polarizing. And now the present status is that we do not have a good LiDAR of that of Calypso nature, but work is going on. It's known as Earth-Care satellite, in which there will be a HSR LiDAR. It will be 355 nanometer. This is again a JAXA and European Space Agency. Of course, directly NASA is also involved. This is the configuration. And basically here they are going to do the spectral resolution. Let me, I will skip these details. Basically, you study the spectrum of the scattered signal. You know, because Rayleigh molecule, because of Brownian motion, they will spread. Whereas aerosol, because they are bulky, they will give you a sharp signal. So backscattered signal, you actually wavelength scan it. So this is Rayleigh signal, this is me signal. So directly you can resolve. That is what it is measured separately. This is really a fantastic idea. I hope that this is the latest information I could get it. Integration is going on in the Airbus laboratory. It's called, this will be ready. I learned that it will be next 22, June 22, it will be launched. So many of you, our younger generation, may be using data from this data. So let me summarize. So we have seen what's a LiDAR. We have seen about the theories, some radiative processes. And then as a technical detail, we have seen the laser, telescope, photomultiplier, and noises. And some quickly, of course, different LiDAR types with the sample results. I have not covered this topic. One is the differential absorption LiDAR or dial used for ozone studies. Because of lack of time, there is a sodium LiDAR for measuring temperature at very high the mesospheric altitude around 100 kilometers. And of course, there are various inversion algorithms and their own limitation. That can be a separate talk for depending on what you want to study. There are Klecht algorithm, Foreman algorithm, Heisner algorithm. There are many. Similarly for aerosol, clouds, trace gases, etc. Let me thank my colleagues, of course, first and foremost, Dr. Yashwant Acharya, who was with me in the beginning in releasing the LiDAR, and then many of my students, Ramchandran, Dilip Gangali, Harish, and my colleagues from NAR, Dr. Raghunath, Dr. Bhavani Kumar, Dr. Alok Teri, and my last student, Amit Pandit. He is now in NASA. So that's it, I think. Yeah, yes. Thank you very much for your patient listening. And at the time being, I will stop sharing my slide and see whether if there is any.
Yes, sir. There are a couple of questions. I will recite the same. So, can you throw some light on Raman LiDAR?
Oh, yes. This question has come from
Piraksama A.
Piragasuma, yeah, okay. Raman LiDAR, see, as the name signifies, in fact, you can use Raman scattering process in both the ways. One is in the emitter side. That is, see, there are some fixed wavelengths are available, right, in the market. But if you want a special wavelength, you can attach a, like instead of frequency doubling, you can attach a Raman tube and get the Raman scattered light. So that can be used at the scattering side also. In the transmitter side. Similarly, they are also called a kind of Raman LiDAR. Another type of Raman LiDAR is you use the Raman scattering at the receiving side. That is, you know that as the light goes, there are different molecules like nitrogen, oxygen, water vapor. So they all have their own Raman scattering. You know, the Stokes light, they are coming anyhow. Of course, the signal is very, very low. But if we have proper filter, and so you have one exciting wavelength, but from nitrogen, Raman scattered nitrogen line, Raman scattered water vapor line, like that you can select it. And so the beauty of here is that you don't have to give any correction. You know that once you have fixed the wavelength, you know that only nitrogen molecule is giving or only water vapor molecule is giving. That is a simple way of elaborating a Raman LiDAR.
Thank you, sir. Sir, next we have a question from Sunil Kumar Sharma ji. So he asked that can LiDAR suppress the radar? Can LiDAR suppress radar? Hello, sir. Due to technical difficulties, we are not able to reach him. So let us wait for a while. Yes, sir. To all the participants, I think due to technical difficulty, we are not able to connect to sir. So we'll wait for a while till he connects back. And a lot of you were having queries regarding sending the presentations, which I'm not sure if it is possible. I apologize to the participants for this lag. So, due technical difficulties, sir is not will not be able to rejoin. So the questions that have been asked, I'll forward the same to sir, and maybe its answers can be discussed in the later session. And regarding the presentations, I request the participants to kindly take the snapshots of the presentations and keep it with them if possible for the exam. And now there's a time for a short break of 15 minutes, and the web program will resume back again at 11:35 a.m.